Welcome to all to this AFRY Smart Bioindustry Insights webinar, and good afternoon in Europe, good evening in Asia, and good morning in Americas. Great to see that we have so many participants worldwide today joining. My name is Kalle Turkkila, and I'm head of AFRY Management Consulting's packaging practice area, as well as responsible also for our AFRY Smart online services. I'm very happy to host this webinar for you today. Let's check our agenda. So we have for the next 40 minutes two very interesting topics. Our first topic focuses on recovered paper in China, and it is presented by David Paulson, while then the second topic is the introduction to our recently renewed AFRY Smart online business intelligence service, and it will be conducted by Minna Luukka. During the presentation, it is possible to use the chat functionality to send questions to us, and after the webinar, we are then pleased to come back to you regarding your questions and then have a good further discussions offline. So that's about the agenda. So let's introduce our speakers today. Minna, would you please start and say a few words about yourself?
Yes, hello from my side as well. My name is Minna Luukka. I'm working as a senior consultant at AFRY Management Consulting already nearly 10 years, and I've been focusing on the packaging tissue segment. But for the last recently, I've been heading with the AFRY Smart development. David, please go ahead.
Thank you, Minna. Yes, I'm Dave Paulson. I've worked for AFRY for 15 years this year. I'm a director at the business, and I look after our paper business globally. And that also includes all of the work we do in the recovered paper and recycling sector. Before working for AFRY, I spent 3 years working for the UK government as its paper industry advisor. I also spent 6 years before that working for a paper mill in the UK. Before that, I spent a year working for a University of Dresden in Germany in its paper technology department, and prior to that, did a degree in paper science with management. So it's been a life in the paper industry, of which by far and away the biggest chunk of that has been in the consulting sector.
Thanks, Minna and David, and excellent. Let's start then with our agenda and the first topic, the evolving demand for recovered paper in China. David, I know that you and the team have spent quite some time looking at the China fiber situation, and I have already had a preview of this really interesting presentation you are going to deliver. Before you start, do you mind if I ask you the question of who is really impacted by what is going to happen in this recovered paper space and China?
Yeah, cheers, Kalle. Yeah, we have been spending quite a lot of time looking at what's been going on with recovered paper in China. You know, there's been so many developments in recent years and some really major ones this year. I mean, of course, the people that are the most impacted are the Chinese paper producers, but we think there are real sort of global implications for what's going on there. I would say the two biggest sectors that are impacted are pulp suppliers. Yeah, we will see increased demand for pulp, as we'll see going in a few moments. Certainly, the recovered paper sector is massively impacted in some very positive and also some very negative ways. Aside from that, there's plenty of others that are impacted, but perhaps to lesser extent. You know, global packaging producers will certainly see an impact from what's going on in China as well. But I would expect that some of the ripples of what we see in China will continue throughout the overall sector. So hopefully that answers your question, Kalle, and I'll make a start. So
yeah, looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, so we've put together half a dozen pages to give our view and explain what we're thinking is going on in China at the moment. We're all aware that how much China's economy has developed over the recent century. But with that, there's been a lot of growth in the pulp and paper sector, but we also know that China's a very fiber deficit region. So lots of developments have needed to happen to enable the pulp and paper industry to develop in China. And with that, we've seen lots of changes, but lots of those changes have started to have various impacts on the recovered paper sector, and we're starting to see some major changes to that. And as we go through the next 6 pages, I think hopefully we can give some perspective on what's actually been happening. So as we go through, now there's a lot of information on the first page, so don't be daunted by it, and we'll go through it bit by bit. I might spend a bit more time on the first page and the last page of the half a dozen pages. So as we see this timeline going through from 2013 on the left through to the present day, what we're showing on here is, first of all, in these grey boxes at the top, some of the initiatives that the Chinese government's put into place to restrict recovered paper imports into the country. And these different restrictions have got different names that were given by the Chinese authorities. You may have heard of people talking about the green fence. This came in 2013, and this is where the Chinese started to put sort of higher restrictions on the quality requirements for recovered paper, setting contamination levels. Then this was taken a step further in the beginning of 2017 with something called the National Sword Program, and that really started to restrict volumes of recovered paper going into China by ensuring that only licensed importers could import the material, and they had to be above a certain size. There was a ban on the import of mixed recovered paper because that was seen to be the lowest quality material, and there was some extra quality checks and requirements on things like moisture content as well. And we'll come back to some of those restrictions on volumes in a second. Going through to 2018, we had something called Blue Sky, where the contamination levels were brought down further. Then we had the US trade wars, which increased the tariffs on material coming in from the US, which brought in extra restrictions. And fundamentally, it's culminated with, from the beginning of this year, a total ban on the imports of recovered paper into China. So you remember that I mentioned in 2017 there was some permitting requirements and only licensed permitters could bring in materials. Well, what we're showing on these pie charts is the size of those permits. So in 2017, the permits totaled 28 million tons. And these permits were awarded to Nine Dragons, Lianman, Shanying, and so on, all the largest recovered paper buyers in China. When it came through to 2018, they were only allowed to import 18 million tons. Then in 2019, 10 million tons, and in 2020, 7 million tons. And then the permits effectively expired, and nobody was allowed to import any material during that period. So we can see that even from, if we look at the moment in what actually happened, but purely from a licensing viewpoint, there was only a certain amount of material allowed to be imported, and that's deteriorated over the last 3 or 4 years. But at the same time, we've seen loads more pulp and paper capacity coming into place. Now, we monitor every major announcement that happens in the pulp and paper industry globally. And as such, we can also monitor what capacities are being brought on stream. So starting in 2017, 2017 Q1, 300,000 tons of recycled paper capacity came on stream in China. In the next quarter, another 610,000 tons. In the next quarter, another 770,000 tons, and so on. So what we've got along here is a cumulative graph about how much extra recycled paper capacity has come on stream during these years. And effectively, since National Sword came into place, since the restrictions have gone into place, reducing the amount of recovered paper going into China, 18 million tons more paper capacity has come on stream in China, which is a tremendous amount. And it's especially a tremendous amount when you imagine that the amount of fibre available to those 18 million tons has also at the same time become restricted. So let's have a look at what actually happened. So what we've got here is going right the way back to the sort of turn of the millennium. this is the amount of material, recovered paper, that was being imported into China during that period. So about 2.5 million tons in 1999. The import volumes then increased year on year, right the way up to 2008. And in 2008, 27 million tons of material was imported. You can see we've color-coded the graph, so we can show that of those 27 million tons that were imported, we split that between the 4 main recovered paper grades: mixed paper, old newspapers and magazines, high grades, and OCC, old corrugated containers. You can see that old corrugated containers are the major part of it. So there's 2 reasons behind that. One is it's the largest grade on a global basis anyway, but secondly, the main focus of the Chinese developments has also been in and around packaging as well, which is the grade that's used there. So we saw this year-on-year increase from 1999 to 2008, and then really for the next 10 years, it remained reasonably stable, dropped up and down a little bit, down a little bit with a recession, then back up again, stabilized a bit, and really stayed around this sort of 27 million ton level. And then you remember, this is the point where the new restrictions start coming into place in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and then all of a sudden it's dropped to 0 again. So it's been a major change, but one of the things to really point out is once the ban has come into place from the beginning of January this year, this is not a sudden thing. We haven't dropped all of a sudden from 27 million tons going into China to 0. It has happened on a straight line basis over the last 4 years or so. At the same time, the grey line shows the percentage share of imports of recovered fibre as a proportion of the overall fibre requirements in China. And we can see that really since about 2003, the importance of imports has also decreased gradually through that period as well. So one of the questions, I suppose, it always has to be, well, what's been happening in China? Can they collect more material in China? Well, yes, and we see 2 things on this graph. In the blue bars, we can see the tons of recovered paper being collected in China, of which the vast majority is continue to be used in China. It's not exported from China. So around the turn of the millennium, 12 to 13 million tons being collected, and that's increased pretty much year on year, all the way through to the most recent statistics, which show that 55 million tons were collected in 2019. I think the 2020 figure should just about be out now as well. At the same time, the collection rate, which is the black line, has gone up steadily as well. Now, of course, there's 2 reasons that the volumes increased. The volumes increased because of the collection rate increase, but the volume increases because the Chinese are simply collecting more and consuming more and more paper. Therefore, there is more and more paper to be consumed. Now, the other thing to be aware of, and we can talk about this for a long time, but I'll give you the very short version, is that the collection rate at whatever it is at this particular point, 49% or so, looks very low. There's kind of a statistical anomaly here where Chinese collection rates always look artificially low, and Western European and North American collection rates always look artificially high, and it's all about the boxes that get transported from one country to another without them really going through the trade statistics. You know, if people import a television, they're really importing a television and the cardboard box that comes with the television, but it only ever gets noted as a television, and that means that cardboard boxes effectively end up in certain countries, leave one country and end up in another country, but without going through the statistics. So what that means is that there's not as much material in China for China to collect because the things have been exported. But in a country like the UK, there is more cardboard around than we think there is because it's been imported as a television. If that makes a degree of sense. But that's why Chinese collection rates often look a bit lower than they are in reality. So in terms of we wanted to have a look at this because these are the 4 main countries that export recovered paper: the US, Japan, the UK, and Canada. They're really the 4 largest exporters. If we look after this, then Australia would be next, and then after that, it then really becomes quite some sort of smaller volumes. So these 4 countries really account for the lion's share of all exports of recovered paper. And what we wanted to look at here is how much material is actually being collected in these countries. Well, whilst collections increased from 1919 right the way through to the recession, we saw a dip after the recession, and then we saw that it's sort of flatlining until it's reduced a little bit further. And there's 2 things happening here. Whilst collection rates have increased a little bit in those countries during that period, the consumption of paper has fairly significantly gone down in those countries as well, leaving less material available for collection. So collection rates are up, paper consumption down a bit. Overall, things have remained reasonably flat until the last year or 2, where we've really started to see a drop, mainly because of the significant decrease in consumption of newspapers and magazines. So there's not the same degree of material available in these countries as well. We talked earlier about how much capacity we've seen in China, and the fact we've seen an extra 18 million tons of recycled paper capacity in the last few years. Well, our forecasts are really expecting tremendous amounts of growth as well. What we wanted to look in here is how much material has actually been planned and where we expect that to be. So looking at the things that are in the pipeline, and we're not taking into account here any capacities that may shut down and come out, but certainly new capacities going in would show that we would expect to see very significant increases in containerboard supply. And at the same time, we've also put in a demand forecast. To those familiar with this graph, you'll see that will look like a very big disparity between demand and capacity. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that some capacity will drop out. Another is that some of the planned capacity almost certainly won't happen. The other side is we also believe that in general capacity tends to be a bit overstated in China compared to European and North American countries. So as I come on to my final graphic, and there's some really interesting stories behind this, and I'm going to sort of try and talk through this to give the clear explanation about what's going on here, because I think this is probably one of the most fascinating bits of some of the things that we're talking through this morning. So let me go through this piece by piece. What we're showing in the bar chart on the left-hand side is the fiber demand for the paper and packaging industry in China. So in 2019, the industry required 105 million tons of fiber, and this is how it got its fiber. It got 12 million tons from integrated pulp. It got 2 million tons from pulp production in China that was sold to paper mills in China. It's gained 23 million tons from market pulp that was exported to China. Just short of 1 million tons from unbleached recycled pulp, which is a reasonably new product coming into the country. About 56 million tons from recovered paper collected within the country, and about 11 million tons from recovered paper that was imported. As we went through to 2020, the overall demand for fibre stayed very, very similar, and this is unusual, and this is purely because of COVID. So COVID suppressed the typical growth that we've seen in China, and the overall demand for fibre stayed reasonably the same. So the paper industry output in China in 2020 compared to 2019 was very, very similar. But at the same time, we know that the imports of recovered paper deteriorated, and they deteriorated from 11 through to 6. So what did that mean in terms of where China got its fibre from? Well, domestic recovered paper collection stayed about the same. The amount of unbleached recycled pulp, this reasonably new product, doubled. So we went from, I think it was 0.9 million tons to 1.8 million tons in 2020. The amount of market pulp that was bought from outside of China and brought into the country went from 23 to 25. The domestic market pulp increased, and integrated market pulp increased. Effectively, when imported recovered paper went down, everything else either stayed about the same or went up, and that helped to sort of fill this gap. But as we go through to 2021, if we assume that this 6 million tons disappears, and that's what's stated, and that's certainly what's been happening, and if we look at AFRY's forecasts for what we expect China to need, we expect it to need in 2021 115 million tons of fibre. That means there's a 15 million ton gap that needs to be filled for where China's going to get its fibre from. And one of the deep questions for us is, well, where on earth is that going to come from? And yes, we are absolutely certain it will get more from domestic recovered paper. We all know that China is recovering from COVID very remarkably. And with that, we expect domestic recovered paper volumes to increase. We know that there are plenty of projects in the pipeline and happening regarding unbleached recycled pulp. So we know this 2 million tons here will certainly jump up into 2021 as well. We would expect that the amount of market pulp that's bought by China will also increase. Domestic market pulp may increase a little bit, albeit not so significantly, and similar case with integrated pulp. So we know that each one of these will increase, but it's a very, very deep question about whether we actually believe it can fulfill this 15 million ton gap. And quite frankly, we think that's a heck of a challenge for China to achieve over the next few years. So I hope that's given you some insight into what we think's going on in China, to what we think some of the challenges are for China. Obviously, with that comes some opportunities, particularly for people exporting different fibre products into China. And I'm fully aware that we're presenting this at the same time we're looking at AFRY Smart. I can tell you that almost all of the information on this presentation was derived from our AFRY Smart. Only some of the material right at the start, looking at some of the licensing, did not come from our AFRY Smart platform. So like I say, I hope that's been really helpful, and I'll hand back over to Callum.
Thanks, David. That was really interesting, and it will be also interesting to see how 2021 after all plays out. Do you have already a specific view what is happening right now in the recovered paper markets and China?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I have to say this forecast was done at the beginning of the year. So the 115 million tons was our view as we reached the end of 2020, and this slide was put together back in January. We can say that COVID has probably slowed things a little bit more in China than we've expected during the first part of this year. So I suspect that by the end of the year, that 115 million tons forecast is probably a little bit overstated based on the first 6 months of the year. So it'll become slightly easier for China to narrow that gap this year. So I think it's probably masking the problem a little bit, if you see what I mean. So in other words, because of what we're seeing with COVID, and actually the demand is just a little bit suppressed, that should mean that this challenge about fulfilling this gap is not quite as challenging as we would have expected. Although the challenge is still there, it's just a little bit hidden at the minute because of that. So yes, things have been a little bit less tight than we would have anticipated in the last few months or so.
Thanks, Dave. We will continue monitoring what is happening in recovered paper markets, but now it's time to move on with the agenda, and Minna will now continue with AFRY Smart online service and how it can support decision making in the bioindustry value chain, and it's also very relevant for those having great impact what is happening in recovered paper markets. So Minna, perhaps it would be good to start by explaining what is AFRY Smart.
Yes, so AFRY Smart is an online bioindustry database and analytics platform. And here at the AFRY Management Consulting, the data is our core, and we have gathered bioindustry related data for from public sources for over 40 years. And now AFRY Smart has been renewed, and this platform has been renewed and updated version launched early this year. On this slide, we have few screenshots from this renewed AFRY Smart platform.
Yes, this renewal was really a major investment for us, and perhaps it would be good for audience also to know why we decided to do it. Would you elaborate that as well?
Yes, so most importantly, we wanted to add value to our clientele. So AFRY Smart allows, as David also said in his presentation, so that it allows us to support our clientele throughout their strategic decision making, whether it's an investment planning, whether it's market analysis, or you wanna do some competitor monitoring, for example. We have already very wide content in terms of data that we serve for the whole bioindustry sector. And this renewed AFRY Smart platform allows us to add new features and tools much more faster there than before. And in addition, we have got very positive feedback from our current existing clients. So very, very successful renewal.
That's great. You mentioned that we serve whole bioindustry. Would you please let us know what it means in practice and what are really our offerings?
Yeah, so we serve the whole bioindustry sector, and we have there in this AFRY Smart, we have several pipelines of offering, covering from forestry and biomass. We have wood products. Then, in addition, our main focus, pulp and paper, packaging, board, tissue sector. In addition, we have advanced bioproducts, such as biofuels, biochemicals in the database. And we continuously develop new offering for all of these main sectors. Then on this slide that you can see, we have some examples of our offering. Here are main focus on the pulp and paper sector. So we have the mill technology details, covering thousands of mills and plants globally. Then we have investment plans to follow up investment projects. Then industry structure, making ranking list and benchmark assets. Then cost competitiveness, which we have a few screenshots here on the right, are unique analysis to benchmark the competitiveness of producers. Then we have market data with forecast, so especially long-term forecast. Tip here, we have the previous webinar in our World Paper Market Outlook, which you can also find from our AFRY Smart web pages. Then we have wood resources as well, so many tools under development and offered there. But what is important is that AFRY Smart is tailored for every client, so you can select the scope that exactly fits your needs. So,
yeah, sounds excellent, and I'm sure that there are now quite many people waiting to see the system itself. So I guess the time for the demo.
Yes. Let's start with the demo. So we have here the AFRY Smart front page. Let's start with our core data, so the mill info, where we have the technical details. by mill. And this mill info covers the data. Let's wait for its opening. So this contains all the pulp and paper mills globally. And as mentioned before, this is based on publicly available information. Let's have a look at, for example, European testliner mills here. So we can select here the main grade, container board, and then the grade unbleached testliner. We have here a list of mills. Then in there are some visualization on below, so we can, for example, see the mills on a map there as well. But then when we look at the actual mill card that we have the technical details, let's have a look at, for example, Saigas Partington in the UK. And here is a summary. So we have information about the paper and paperboard machines here. If there would be any pulp line, that information would be here as well. Then we have some details about the steam and power production as well. This is the summary. So in addition, we have very detailed information about the equipment. So for the pulp production lines, for the paper machines, where you can see the equipments by paper machine, and if there's any modernizations, for example, you can see those there as well. Paper finishing, if there's any coating lines, sheeting lines as well, and major investment projects, if there would be any future projects announced for that mill. And you can also find the shop paper and pulp lines if there had been something earlier at the site. Then let's have a look at our this project tracker tool, where we can then look at the major investments. Let's have a look at, as David was talking about, the Chinese recycled container board growing capacity. So let's have a look at, for example, then China. Chinese testliner projects here. So now we have a list of the projects. Here we have some visualization here in the bottom. So we can see on the left-hand side, we can see the announced capacity changes by year and by status. So as a default, we have here the decided and planned ones. We can see that there's not that many decided projects, but there's a lot of planned ones in China. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that same data, but divided now by group and company. Then what is nice that if we take China out, exclude China and see these global numbers, so we can then actually see the changes globally. So the darker the blue color, the more changes. So most of the testliner changes are focused here on China. Then next, let's have a look at our cost competitiveness benchmarking tool. As we are talking about recovered paper-based producers, let's have a look at, for example, newsprint in Europe. Over there. Newsprint in Europe, which is based on white recovered paper. So in this cost competitiveness tool, you can benchmark the production cost for a specific paper grade in a specific region. We have here first we have a list of the competitors modeled for that grade. Then we have a cost supply curve presented here, where we can highlight, for example, few producers. And now it's showing the competitiveness of these two paper machines here in terms of manufacturing cost, in terms of delivered cost, and then full cost. Then in addition, we have the cost breakdown graph. And in this cost breakdown graph, the manufacturing costs are now split by cost item. So starting from the wood, we have then split integrated and market pulp, as well as recovered paper. And then you can see the chemicals, energy, personnel, and other manufacturing costs as well. Then you can look at this into one specific delivery destination. So now here, for example, to Frankfurt, and this delivery destination you can change among many possible options. In addition, you can alter and change many other calculation parameters, not only the delivery destinations, but many other as well. But this was a very quick snapshot of AFRY Smart. So if you are interested in, please contact us and we organize a more detailed demo just for you.
Thank you, Minna. It is a really useful tool, and as Minna already mentioned, we have received a lot of positive feedback after the renewal. So as said, happy to conduct private demos whenever needed. So this was our webinar content for today. We are happy to continue the discussion with you offline. So if any questions, comments, please just let us know, and we are happy to continue the dialogue with you. So thank you very much for your participation today, and wishing you a very good continuation of the day. Thank you.